the number of donors also decreases, mostly elderly people who had their own experiences with the camp, made that they themselves came through the camp or some relatives during all those years. And you saw on the first slide the train station in former times, and today's look on the train station you see in the lower right, and it's the museum right now. Okay, yeah. First, a few basic information. It was founded on September the 20th, just 2 days ago. It was 76 years ago since it was founded by the British military government, and which is remarkable. At that time, several of those camps were erected in the British and American occupation zone and the Soviet occupation zone as well. But it's the last and only camp from that time that still is operating. And over the years, we'll talk about who came through the camp later in detail. But one of the highlights was 1955 in the fall, after Chancellor Adenauer traveled to Moscow to negotiate with the Soviet leadership the release of the last prisoners in Soviet camps. And in Germany, they were considered as prisoners of war. In the Soviet Union, they were considered as criminals, war criminals. And finally, Adenauer managed that they were released, and they came to Friedland and through Friedland in order to get back to their homes. And with this event, Friedland got the name or the nickname Tor zur Freiheit, Gateway to Freedom. And this is kept till today. And it has been a reception center for refugees and expellees after World War II, for released prisoners of war, which I just mentioned, for displaced persons in the immediate aftermath of Second World War, from Czechoslovakia, from Poland, and other East European countries, for ethnic German immigrants, and for people seeking refuge from many parts of the world. And today, today it serves as the initial reception center for, for ethnic German and Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union, as well as asylum seekers and refugees under resettlement and humanitarian intake programs. Now, just to explain in short what are ethnic German immigrants. The story goes back far. In around 1755, the Russian Empress Catherine the Great asked Germans to settle in Russia, granted them land and some rights. And so quite a few Germans settled along the Volga River. And they stayed there for almost 200 years, until basically after Hitler started the war with the Soviet Union in 1941, Stalin and the Central Committee, or the Politburo of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, ordered all Germans to be deported to Siberia. And that was the highlight, not the beginning, but the highlight of the persecution of Germans. And because of that, they are being considered as victims of the war. And that enables them on their own will to return to Germany, and of course their children and grandchildren and so forth, to return to Germany and become German citizens. And Friedland is the only reception center for those ethnic Germans from Russia. And you might be surprised how many there are. Well, right after Glasnost and Perestroika and the years of Gorbachev, there came about 400,000 a year. Now this number has decreased rapidly, but in the last year before the Corona pandemic, we had 7,300 ethnic Germans coming through Friedland, being registered here and settling from here in the Federal Republic, 7,300. And the number for this year is right now projected to reach about 6,000. So it's picking up after the pandemic and the restrictions that were involved. So that's one very important and the most important group of refugees or of inhabitants in the camp. Okay, I'll talk about that a little bit later again, and I also come back to the Jewish immigrants. So altogether, about 4.5 million people have been registered in the camp since opening in 1945. And so we can say that Friedland is a vanishing point of migrants from 4 continents: South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. In that, from all those different places on our earth, people came to Friedland here as the goal and as the point of entry. So now, why establish a transit camp in Friedland? After the war had ended, Friedland and Gottingen became part of the British occupation zone. The Americans had liberated Gottingen on April the 8th. The same happened to Friedland the same day. And of course, you know that the Americans moved even further to the Elbe River, but then on 1st of June, the zones were shuffled, and so the Soviets occupied that part which was thought that to be their territory. And Gottingen and Friedland were at the very, very, very southern part of the British zone. And the border to the Soviet occupation zone is only 2 miles south from here. And the border, and at that time it was a border to the American occupation zone, was just at the entrance of Friedland. So you stepped out of Friedland and you were in the American occupation zone. That was a very important reason to set up a camp where refugees coming from all directions and going to all directions should be set up. The second point was that the infrastructure helped. We were located at the major train track between North Germany, Hamburg and Bremen, Hanover, and following up to Munich and Frankfurt. So this was, of course, in favor of transporting people and of transporting material and goods to supply the camp and so forth. And when you erect a camp, you need to have space. And the first space which was available was the buildings of Gottingen University's experimental farm. They were empty, no cattle, no pigs there, so it was ready to house the first refugees. To illustrate it again, the 4 occupation zones, the British occupation zone, the Soviet, the American, and the French. Now, the French did not have any common border with the Eastern zone, the Soviet zone. The Americans had, and the British had. And so people from and to the Soviet occupation zone moved either from the American or from the British through certain checkpoints. And one major checkpoint was right here at the border, as I said, 2 miles from Friedland. Friedland is located here. Here we see the map with the locations, Soviet occupation zone, here the road with a checkpoint. Oops, I'm sorry. Oh, how do I go back? Yeah. And here's the American occupation zone with their checkpoint, which was not crowded as much as this one here. This was the most important. And here is Friedland with the orange part here marking the camp. The train tracks, the train station, which is now the museum, which tells the story of the camp, 70 years. It ends with 2015. And the former experimental farm of the university, you see here indicated several Quonset huts or Nissen huts set up by the British. It was given up pretty soon because this land was easily flooded, and so that happened in the fall of 1945. And so the British confiscated part of fields. It was not, there were no buildings up here, fields, and set up the new camp. And this is still the site of today's camp. So that is the situation at the time. And here is what we might call the birth certificate. In the war diary or intelligence summary of September 1945, it says in the last line, whoops, no, down here, I don't know where you have your pictures of the listeners. Well, down here is the line, it says, Refugee Transit Camp, capacity 2,000, opened at Friedland on the 20th of September. This, just to illustrate a little bit, there is no aerial view of the camp of the very first years, but this one here was taken in 1957, and you just might imagine that 1945, 46 until early 1950s, all huts were those British Army Nissen huts, no wooden huts as were later erected. Compared to it, this is how it looks like today. Same location, eastern part, the train tracks are down here. Road passes right through from our village of Friedland to the neighboring village. Then you have a private settlement right here, private homes. And over here is the so-called western part of the camp. Actually, here, this is it. Few private homes, and then again. Okay, now, what you can see here is that the camp is part of our town. There is no barbed wire. There is no checkpoint. You don't have to have a passport whatsoever to enter or to leave. You are free to move in and out day and night. No restrictions whatsoever. And that makes it, or explains possibly why, although we have refugees from foreign countries now, which are from nature, perhaps at first sight, foreign to us, especially from Africa and from the Middle East. But that might explain why the situation in Friedland has always been peaceful. There have been no quarrels, no street fights, no crime whatsoever. It is a peaceful neighborhood within the village. And we get along quite well with each other. Of course, I might stress that Friedland is still a transit camp. People do not stay here for much longer than 1 to 2 weeks. And that eases probably also the situation for those who are in the camp. Here in Friedland, they get through all the paperwork which is necessary for their start in Germany, and then they are being transferred to other places all over Germany according to a certain scale. But they stay here, as I said, mainly only for 1 to 2 weeks. Okay. By the way, I just discovered that today, that is something as a side point. On this picture here, you see this remarkable car, which is very unusual compared to the other cars in the camp. And that was taken on the day when the British journalist Sefton Delmer, I don't know whether you can read the line down here. Oops. Sefton Delmer, the chief foreign affairs reporter of the Daily Express, visited the camp in order to talk to released prisoners of war, or released prisoners from the Soviet Union, scientists which were working on the Soviet nuclear program, and they were released on that day, and they were registered in Friedland. And here, this journalist, Sefton Delmer, who is a very well-known person in British history of media, was here in the camp. Okay, going back to our original major point. Here are some pictures from October 1945, taken by an American soldier who was within the psychological warfare department of the US Army, a born German Jewish man who had escaped to the United States and received the American citizenship and came back as an American soldier and did newspaper work for the Americans and radio work and so forth. And he came to Friedland in October, and he took pictures of the situation as it showed there. And these are the only pictures of that time which are available. The train station is over here, and people coming from the east entering the camp here. These are the grounds of the experimental station of the university, agricultural station. And here is a British military truck which unloads refugees and luggage, elderly people, sick people, women with little children and so forth. An American patrol car, scout car, is parked over here. The experimental farm, this is a view of the interior as it looked like in those days. And if you turn left here and look in this direction, you see such a quarter where people then spent their nights. A family in their shelter and the former stable for pigs. British and German volunteers from the International Service for Peace, the IVSP, built Nissen huts in 1956, and altogether 220 Nissen huts finally were set up to house and give room for up to 6,000 refugees per day. That is important, per day. They had to leave within 24 hours after arrival to make room for the next 6,000. And those Nissen huts also contained the necessary administrative, medical, and service offices. Delousing was a very, very important thing. And the registration, everyone got a registration slip here. That was the main purpose actually of those camps, to register people and from here to direct them to another place, and knowing about the whereabouts of the people and knowing how many people actually had entered the occupation zone. So the registration papers that the refugees got here contained 3 slips for meals, 1 breakfast, 1 lunch, and another lunch for the evening. And that was it. Afterwards, they had to be away. As I mentioned, no space available for more, and also in order to prevent epidemics, cholera or tuberculosis or other infectious diseases. Of course, there were people who were too weak to move. They could stay here and they were hospitalized. Also, a number of people died here after arrival or shortly before arrival, dying on the fields, drowning in the river that passes through Friedland. And quite a few of them are buried, and their graves are still on our cemetery. Well, besides the refugees and the released prisoners of war, transports of children came through the checkpoint. You might imagine that the Soviet checkpoint is somewhere in the upper right corner, and they move here. This is in the winter of 46, 47, and they were accompanied, in this case here, by a Catholic nun who served as an aide with some of her sisters in the camp, just like the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and other charity organizations. Children which were on their way to their family, to their parents or mothers or grandparents who had arrived earlier in the in West Germany, in the Western zones at that time. That was before the Federal Republic and the GDR were founded. And here is another transport like this, a little bit later, more pleasant time of the year, but still cold and wet, obviously. And here they have arrived in the camp. So this gives you an impression of the first year and a quarter of how many people went through here. And when I mentioned the number 6,000, it becomes more obvious with the number of people registered in the camp between the first 100 days, September 20th to December 31st, 1945, 553,095 people. And the entire next year, from January 1st to December 31st, 583,099. So altogether, it is 1.1 million people within 15 months. And that, of course, was the largest amount of people in such a short time. Remember, 4.5 million altogether now in the framework of a time period of 76 years, but 1.1 million within the first 15 months. Here we have a picture of a group of released German prisoners of war at the checkpoint, the Soviet checkpoint, with a Soviet soldier and his East German helping aide, a assistant policeman, checking their release papers, perhaps. And then another picture from that era, a large group of expellees, people who were expelled from their homes in parts of Poland, which used to be German before the war, and who were, according to the regulations of the Potsdam Treaty, now expelled from Poland. And they came in large groups on foot from the train station, the last train station in the Soviet zone, walked 2 miles or 1.5 miles from the train station to the checkpoint, and another 2 miles to Friedland. Again, accompanied by a nun. Once again, a different Soviet soldier, the same East German policeman, a different group, the hammer and sickle emblem of the Soviet Union. And on the other side of the no man's land, the barrier opened, guarded by a British soldier at the checkpoint to the Soviet zone. This checkpoint was finally closed in 1952. until that time, once in a while, when a transport arrived for Friedland, it opened its gates and then closed again. It was not used after 1946 for traffic between normal traffic between British and Soviet occupation. So the Salvation Army, and that is not the German chapter, but the British Salvation Army, not the Heilsarmee as it is in German, offers a first warm drink with the mobile canteen, as they called it, at this checkpoint to the Soviet zone in Bösinghausen. And here the group of Salvation Army soldiers is gathering in front of what they call the returnees' home. And the Salvation Army was under the command of Miss Mitchell, as she was called here. And she was here in Friedland from January 46 until March 52. And she was one of the most impressive people who didn't speak much, but who put hands on. Let me quote, she was head of operations. Her duties included the procurement of food and clothing, as well as the care of residents and camp personnel. The positive reports in newspapers, the camp chronicles, and in literature about Friedland are particularly striking. Throughout benevolent remarks can be found about her, a British woman in post-war occupied Germany. And she remained in Friedland as long as the camp was under British command in 1st of April 1952. We'll talk about that date a little bit later. So, I repeat myself, the British set the camp up 20th of September 1945, and it remained under British rule and under British command until the 31st of March 1952. Some pictures illustrate the role of the British. Here's the British commander of October 1945. This is a photo from this American that I mentioned before. And here also a photo which I enhanced a little bit so that it can be seen better. And his remarks with this photo: after arrival in a British truck from the border, refugees are fed and deloused. And you see here, it's very wet area, very muddy. And as I said, later it was even flooded. And so they had to move the camp to the other side of the train tracks. And there was a parade, perhaps the king's birthday, whatever. The honorable people sat on the chairs on this side over here. And if I'm not mistaken, it is, you might be able to correct me or not, it is a group of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. That's what I gathered, who were in charge at that time of the occupation forces in Gottingen, and Friedland belonged to the Gottingen command. Anyway, they marched here through the camp. The British flag, the Union Jack is hoisted in the main alley of the camp. But on April 1st, 1952, the time of the British as the major force in Friedland ended, and it now became part of the administration of the state of Lower Saxony, Niedersachsen, and the barrier which was blocking the street at two places here, and of course on the other side of the road, were removed. You might remember from the picture of today, which I showed you, the aerial view of Friedland and the camp, that a street was passing between the east and west part of the camp, and this was how the street looked at that time, and that was exactly it. Now, what we have seen in Friedland in all those years, German expellees and refugees from Poland, from the Soviet Union, from Romania, Czechoslovakia, even North Korea, a group of, I don't know, I think 18 priests, German priests, were released from North Korea in the late 1950s and arrived in Friedland. Then released German prisoners of war, and from many countries, and should not be here, from many countries if released to the British zone. There were German prisoners of war in 28 countries, and most of them released their prisoners of war, at least those who wanted to live in the British zone of occupation through Friedland. Then also foreign prisoners of war from Soviet camps, for example, Italian, Dutch, and Belgian prisoners of war who had served either as Italian troops, or in the case of the Netherlands and Belgium, as part of German troops, and fought in the Soviet Union and were imprisoned there. Then displaced persons, as I mentioned before, and so-called infiltrees. Infiltrees were called people, I think it's an awful description, but these were people mainly from Eastern European countries who after the war fled their countries because, well, for several reasons. Some feared the Soviet occupation, and they feared for their lives, for their well-being, and so forth. Others were adventurers and tried to find their luck in the West. Then there were, unfortunately, also criminal elements among them, and all of them drove the same impetus to reach America, Britain, Canada, Australia. That were the preferred countries of immigration, but their way led through Germany, and some were sent back directly from Britain, for example, and then they showed up here in the camp and were here for some time interned. Then we had refugees from the Hungarian Revolution in 1956 against Soviet Union and the Hungarian Party, Communist Party, from Chile in 1973 after the coup d'etat against Allende. The Vietnamese boat people, more than 4,000 came through Friedland. The very first boat people who ever came to Germany were invited to Friedland. From Uganda in the time of the rule of Idi Amin, from Sri Lanka, and in recent years, Chechnya, Georgia, but also Nepal, Bhutan, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Eritrea. These are the major countries from which people right now arrive here: Syria, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Eritrea, and quite recently, Afghanistan. And then the already mentioned ethnic German resettlers from Poland, Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, and the Ukraine, and also Jewish immigrants, Jews living in the former Soviet Union, who are who feel uncomfortable, who feel growing anti-Semitism, and they are also eligible to come to Germany and receive German citizenship. Now, quite recent photos, that's how it looks like when those buses arrive here with transports with refugees qualifying for the humanitarian reception program when they arrive in Friedland. In this example here, from a camp in Turkey. That is in the western part of the camp. And you see these people under the humanitarian reception program come here because they have special needs, as you can clearly see with this lady here, who is handicapped quite heavily. And then they have a little bit of belongings, but not much. And this is yesterday's situation. We had as inhabitants 43 asylum seekers, 2 Jewish immigrants, 113 ethnic German immigrants, 165 humanitarian reception program refugees, this time 156 from Lebanon and 9 from Central Africa, from Niger, and 85 Afghan local aids, altogether 408. Well, the capacity right now is 900, but under normal circumstances, it has been cut in half due to Corona. And so we are now at close to the limit of what we can receive in Friedland under these circumstances. By the way, I just today joined a conference in the camp with all the authorities in charge of the camp. One interesting point was, well, originally we had 180 Afghan local aids here in Friedland. About 100 have been already registered and sent to other places inside Germany. And from the remaining 85, they are being processed further on, but several of them do not want to stay in Germany, but want to go to Britain because they claim that they have been aids to the British forces in Afghanistan. So right now the camp is in negotiations via the British Embassy in Berlin with the Home Office in London to clear the situation about those Afghans who want to be sent further to England. We still do have one of those huts, which is used by the museum for special purposes. And here we see an exhibition of paintings. And this is a special program. The museum is very much interested in employing the refugees with this during their time here, and enjoying them, and give them some kind of yeah, how should I say, you know, to help them bridge the time. And one idea was from our Syrian employee. She loves to paint, and her idea was, let women from those groups of Syrian refugees paint a picture, and let a German friend or volunteer finish the picture. And so a lot of pictures have been developed, and this was then highlighted in this exhibition, I Feel. And there are very, very remarkable products. And you might have a look at these things at our webpage, museum-friedland.de. You'll see quite a few of those pictures. And here you see a group of refugees being employed by this Syrian lady with doing some painting here with the children and also the adults for them to have some pleasure. Okay, now interesting is, and we give as a giveaway to all our visitors postcards with quotes from refugees from over the years, how they looked at Friedland. And the answers differed quite a bit, depending on the situation when they stayed in Friedland, depending on their personal situation, depending on their mood, whatever. And here are some of them. Pleasant it was not in Friedland, but Friedland was for me like a hotel. Friedland was for me a place of disappointment. Friedland was an adventure for us. At first, Friedland was nothing special. Friedland was for me the door to a normal life. Friedland was just the way we had imagined Germany. Friedland was like a fairy tale. Friedland was a starting point. That concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. And yeah, that's it. Now I'm eager to hear your questions.
Thank you, Klaus. That was really fascinating to actually understand the whole thing from the Second World War up until now, and how you're still welcoming refugees into your community. So I'd like to open it up. So if anybody would like to pose a question, please put your hand up and unmute yourself. And as Klaus says, he's willing to take some questions or open a discussion about refugees, really, and how we welcome them into our countries. Anybody?
Yes, Ellen, if I can make a start.
Yes, please.
I thought that was fantastic. It was a really good expose from 1945 up to now. And my apologies for combining you with Gottingen earlier. It wasn't intended. I've actually got 4 questions I'd like to ask, okay, because there are, as you may be aware, we are looking at our refugees from outside coming into Cheltenham now. And I think there are things there that you've talked about that can be of help. Firstly, how, given the range of refugees that there are in the camp, do you manage with language? Because not every refugee will speak English or German. And so what we're looking at is a range of languages. So my first question would be, how do you relate to that? How do you manage that? Would you like me to ask all the questions and then you can answer all of them?
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
So the first question is about language and the number of languages that are obviously spoken in the camp. Secondly, how do people coming in, new refugees and those looking to transit through, for example, interact with residents, because there are no barriers. How does that happen? The third one is, how are medical needs and educational needs, for example, for children, how are they taken care of? And my final one, I love the picture. I think that's absolutely brilliant. And in Cheltenham, we have a public art festival where we have pictures painted on buildings in our streets. And I would love if you could send me some further details of that, to pass that on to those organizing our festival, so that we can see if we can actually capture that and have some of our people here working with some of those refugees to produce pictures on our buildings in Cheltenham. That would be brilliant. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, okay. To start with the last one, I will take care of that. And thank you. Brochure, it is in German, but I did already for some relatives in the United States an English translation of the texts, and I will send them. So please let Elle know your address, and I can mail it to you. Okay, via this connection. Okay, number 3, medical and educational needs. Yes, well, those transports which arrive Friedland are being, or the people joining those transports are being checked medically beforehand in the camps, originating in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Egypt. The next one will come from Egypt, and so forth. There are medical personnel from NGOs who do medical checks in order to make sure that they don't have a breakdown during the flight and so forth. But of course, you never know, things can happen. We do have a little hospital here in Friedland. It's run by a Catholic charity organization, the Maltesian order. And they can, or doctors from the surrounding area volunteer there and check on those patients who come there, and they can keep people for a night or so. But then if there's something more serious, they will be sent to Gottingen, to University Hospital or other hospitals. They also receive a thorough check, X-ray, after arrival in Gottingen, to make sure that they are free from tuberculosis and other things. Educational, yes, there is what they have places for preschool children and school children, and they try within the very short period, and when their parents are occupied with all the red tape thing, to employ them and to entertain them and to learn, let them learn some German. And so they are very well trained and are very successful, and the children just long for being employed there this morning. And when they leave, usually they are very happy, and when you meet them, they will say hello and guten Tag to you, and just exercise their freshly learned German phrases. But as I said, they stay only here for 2 weeks at the most, and so that is also quite limited. But 5 days for 2 weeks, 5 days each makes 10 days. It's better than nothing. Language, well, yeah, Gottingen, of course, is in the good situation that a university with many foreign languages speaking students is around the corner. Of course, you cannot call in everyone to translate. You have to have certified translators, but you find quite a few of them in Gottingen. Of course, there are some exotic languages that it's hard to find someone. The refugees from Syria, of course, speak Arabic. We do have employees at the museum, for example, 2 who are from Syria, and they also function as certified interpreters at the museum. We also have a lady who was German descent from, from ethnic German from Russia, who speaks Russian and serves as interpreter in the camp if necessary. And yeah, there is obviously enough potential for translators here due to the university and to the many foreigners living in Gottingen. Yeah, interaction with the people in Friedland. Well, it is a business as usual. When the released prisoners of war in 1955 arrived here, they were received as lost sons, as heroes, freed after all from Soviet prisons, and that was overwhelming. But otherwise, people arrive here, people leave here, you meet them on the streets. If they have a question and ask you, you answer. So it is just like in any neighborhood, they are there. And again, since they are here for such a short period, it is not possible to build deeper relations to them. We had that in 2015-16, when those huge influx of people from Syria arrived here, that lots of volunteers came, and those people stayed here sometimes for 8 to 10 weeks because it was so crowded. There was not enough personnel to proceed with the papers and so forth. So that it piled up, and we had up to almost 4,000 people in the camp with a capacity of 700 then. It was awfully crowded, terrible. But at that time, there was quite a lot of engagement. There's one thing, the so-called Friedland Garden. And Friedland Garden is a little garden where they plant fruits and vegetable, and they have some actions there for the refugees. When the weather is all right, they announce it, and they let them come to and they build something together, or they just have a good time together. So this is one of the examples that that is done here. And of course, what I told you about this Syrian lady with the painting things, we had before Corona, this Syrian lady had also inaugurated cell phone dance. Every 4 weeks on Saturday evenings, after the museum had closed, they had invited the inhabitants of the camp to come with their cell phones and play their music from their cell phones via Bluetooth. Yeah, Bluetooth, thank you. And so 2 hours of being jolly good fellows in that museum. It was fantastic. Corona killed it. Okay, that's what I could answer you. Okay, more questions. If
Okay,
you,
anybody else got any other questions? I know it's a lot to take in, really. I suppose for me, Klaus, it's very much, and you've touched on this on one of Flo's questions, was very much about the impact that the camp has had on the local population. As you say, they've only been there for 2 weeks at a time and then they move on. Has there been any particular groups that the local population have felt warmth to, in particular for whatever reason? Or is there any groups that have went, the local population says, I'm not too sure, and they've maybe been what we would call a bit reserved, standoffish, you know, just...
I understand.
You understand, exactly.
Yeah. Well, one group in the past, which was very warm welcome, were the Vietnamese boat people.
Mm.
Due to the fact it was a time of the Cold War.
Mm.
And they were refugees from the communists, and they had experienced persecution by the communists, and they had gone through difficult waters, literally. And most of them were Christians. Although you might not expect it with Southeast Asians, but Vietnam was a French colony, and the Catholic Church there was quite successful in
Converting.
mission services. So these Vietnamese were welcomed very, very, very well and very highly. Another group, the refugees from Chile, about the same time, a little bit earlier, they fled from Chile because they were followers of the socialist president Allende.
Mm.
Communist, social democrats, left socialists, whatever. And they were looked at with quite some hesitation, to put it mildly. They were could possibly be spies for East Germany, and work at the fifth column for the communists to, you know, to destroy our democratic country here. So they were looked at, but not only in Friedland, but in Germany as a whole, in West Germany as a whole, while in East Germany they were received with open arms. Now, looking at the refugees of today, yes, those Muslims from Syria, especially the women, or yet now from Afghanistan, who are dressed in their, you know, traditional, very, yeah, you know, you could hardly see the eyes.
The burqa,
so the burqa, yeah. That makes some people hesitate a little bit. But as I said, they accept it and they respect it. And once in a while, you find on Facebook somebody saying something nasty. But in general, they are here and they go further. They will not stay here. It's, again, business as usual. And so Friedland has got accustomed within those 76 years with quite a few people with different skin colors, with different dress codes. And since the 2011 with different religions. be here.
That's interesting. I think it's a strangeness, but at least if you have people like that coming to your town, it helps educate us all as well about different religions and different dress and different cultures. So that is a good thing, I personally think anyway, but yeah, that's interesting. I'm conscious we are over the hour and it's getting late in mainland Europe. We have a few people in mainland Europe, so on the call. Does anybody want to make a point, ask a question, or just so? Claire, please unmute yourself. Yeah, thank you.
May I speak? Okay, I just wanted to clear up something about the picture we saw of the possible Welsh Fusiliers.
Okay.
I think they might have been Royal Irish Fusiliers because one of them had a kilt on, and it's called a saffron kilt. And I'm not sure that the Welsh actually wear kilts, but the Royal Irish Fusiliers do, and it's called a saffron kilt. And the hackles in their berries are dark green. So just maybe, I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much.
There you are, Klaus. You can add that to your on your slide and to your talk in future. Klaus, I just want to finish quickly if nobody's got another question. When we spoke a few weeks ago, you said that the museum was expanding. And one of the things that you were going to try and do was actually follow some of the people that had come through Friedland and where they're placed in Germany. How is that coming on now? Has it started?
Yeah, it's progressing. Interviews are taking place right now with those people we have already found and notified, and we just don't know when the building will be finished and opened. It is anticipated now 2025, so a few years to go. It should should have opened in 2022, but there are some things some things along which were not anticipated. It's a very it is on the grounds of the camp on the side, but it's also partly on the grounds of the German Federal Railways, and they have very, very special regulations for buildings along their tracks, and that makes it a little bit difficult. That was already the case when we acquired the train station, and it led to 4 years of delay before it could open, only because of the German railways. And here we face a similar situation now. But it should be open by end of 24 or early 25. And yes, the main point is the exhibition in the old train station remains as it is. It will not be changed, but it gets some additions in the new and much larger building. But the main focus will be on migration and integration. Part of it is to follow people who arrived here since 2011, and what happened to them, how they proceeded, and what became out of their dreams and hopes, and how they integrated into the German society.
Well, I
And this-
hope that they've integrated really well and their dreams come true. And I think this is a lovely note to end our meeting on. If there's no other questions, Klaus, thank you ever so much for a fascinating story. Karen wants to say something. Karen? Yeah.
That's from the Gottingen side. Thanks very much, Klaus Magnus, for the interesting presentation and the talk. And I only can tell the others, if you have the chance once to come over to Gottingen with a citizens group, I only can recommend the museum. I have been there several times with groups from our twin towns, and it's always interesting. You can do a guided tour or explore it on your own, listening with an audio guide to the presentation.
Yeah, that was my next thing, Karen. I was going to.
Sorry.
That's all right, but I was going to plug the museum. I was going to give it a big advert. And if you can't get there soon enough, please visit the website. And there's a Facebook page, isn't there, Klaus, as well, for the museum? There's a Facebook page.
Pardon me?
There's a Facebook page for the museum,
Yes,
as well as a
yes,
website.
but that's in German. But a few pages on our homepage are in English.
Yeah, that's right. On the website there in English. Yeah.
You can look at some of the pictures you saw today and others. And talking about languages, we offer free of charge audio guides for visit of the museum, and we have they used to be in German and English, and now they are in German, in English, in Russian, in Arabic, in French, and in Farsi, the language spoken in parts of Afghanistan and in Iran. So it has become multilingual.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again, Klaus.
Sure, it was my pleasure.
Absolutely fascinating. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and we look forward to our next meeting with one of our twin towns in future. It's wonderful to do this. Thank you, everybody, and good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ellen.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Klaus.
You're welcome.
Thank you.